And for more on this conversation, we're now joined by Africa Creation spokesperson Siyaya Koos, and he joins us now via our video link. Siyaya, thank you so much for your time this evening. Of course, a number of theatre enthusiasts yesterday had the opportunity to watch the first installment of The Spirit King. Perhaps maybe just tell us some more about the story and how did it come about?
Thank you very much for having me, and I would like to greet the viewers. Well, the story of The Spirit King was inspired by spirituality, which is African indigenous spirituality. For us as Africans, we always are people who are in need or in search of their own true identity, of something that we can hold on to life, that we can say it's our own. So African indigenous spirituality is the only thing as Africa creations we found that it's relatable to us as Africans. So that's how the story came about, in searching of our own identity as Africans and as a youth in South Africa. We discovered that no, African indigenous spirituality is the one that is more relatable or that identifies with us as Africans.
What would you say was the inspiration behind bringing this to life in a theatre production format?
It goes back to how Africa creation, what Africa creation is all about. So Africa creation is mostly focused in bringing to life African stories. So bringing to life African stories, we've been always profiling African heroes. And you can't tell a story in African essence without talking about African spirituality, because there is no African story without African spirituality. So that's what brought it to life when it comes to us as Africa creations, in terms of bringing this story to life, in terms of there is no story without African spirituality. So all the time when we profile African heroes or we talk about African stories, you have to tap into African spirituality.
And also maybe just share with us the significance of actually telling the story of African spirituality through The Spirit King. What makes it so important to highlight the history of African people?
In the story, if I may speak about the story and how it highlights African history and the African story, we look into the first chapter, which is in the story of The Spirit King, which is the chapter that focuses on the 1800s. The 1800s is when Unzikane, the old prophets in the era of Unzikane, the 1800s, and then that's when Africans lost their spirituality, or they were starting to lose their spirituality. So it moves forward from that after the 1800s, after Africa has been invaded by foreign religions, and then it focuses on now religion being the principal guide of Africa, but Africans finding themselves caught in between the two, because of now they are spiritual people, but now they are made religious by colonial masters, and now they can't practice their spirituality because of the colonial practices that were influenced in Africa. Then you move to the last chapter, which is about the Spirit King, Ubaba Uzilezwe Imboni, the light bearer, whom also comes from a lineage of Obungane, people who were spiritual guiders in the times of Inkosi Oshaka, in the times of Inkosi Ozanzolo in the Xhosa nation.
And I mean, this story, I mean, you're talking about things that happened in the 1800s, as you're saying, and maybe give us an insight in terms of the challenges you came across in trying to research a story of this nature and bringing it, to people in today's lifetime. And also, I mean, one would also say it's also a very sensitive topic, and a number of people would have their own opinions in terms of how you interpreted telling the story through this theatre production.
I think it's a very honest way to put it, because how are you going?
Unfortunately, there it seems as if we are losing Siyaya when it comes to that line, and we are battling a bit there. And he was just trying to answer a very important question about research, especially when you're talking about a story or something that took place in the 1800s and the different interpretations that many would have. And unfortunately, because of that line, we'll try and go back to him and see if he is still there. Siyaya, you were just trying to answer that question for us in terms of the challenges you came across in terms of the research for this theatre production.
So when you research an old story or African story, the thing that you look into, because research is also tampered with, research is also messed up with in terms of the scholars and the Europeans, because 90% of the time, everything we research about as African has been compiled by the Western influence. So what happens is you look into culture and you look into the traditions of Africans in the 1800s and their way of life. If you look at culture, you understand that culture is the way of life of people. So when you look at that way of life of people, within it has its own blueprint or underlying factors about Africans. And then we look at the spirituality of Africa. And then when you look at the spirituality of Africa, it's about a calling, it's about umoya. There is no text, there is no books that you read that can talk for you or explain for you. But if you are saying you are called in Africa, then you need to prove that through what? Your visions must be proven by signs, by miracles, and by also Africa on its own must also prove for you. Like, for example, if you look at people who prayed for Imvula, those people, they have their descendants. Those descendants live today in Jengobabu's village, which is Upungane, used to be one of the people on Netisa Imvula. And then you see that spirituality lived in Skati Sopungane. How do you see that?
Yeah.
We see his descendant also doing the same things and used to do.
All right.
More than Upungane. So now when you look at, yes ma'am?
All right, Sia. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but thank you so much for that insight. And I'm sure a number of theatre enthusiasts will be making their way to witness this production, which is taking place. The first installment took place yesterday in Durban. That is Siyaya Koos from the Africa Creations project. And of course, he is the spokesperson.